I mentioned both UW-Madison and UW Health since the two entities partner closely via SMPH and other departments in making clinical research happen here at the University of Wisconsin, particularly clinical trials, because most are conducted in partnering at the UW Health space, and it requires collaboration, again, from all partners. Secondly, I want to mention as an introductory comment that I don't think anyone would argue that UW-Madison has a robust, maturing, and ongoing human subjects research compliance program in place. I think that's evidenced as by its recent AHRP reaccreditation of the HRPP. And the Office of Research Compliance has a compliance bucket that contains both compliance and quality activities. These activities are not always clearly delineated as compliance versus quality. So naturally, the two definitions become a bit conflated, although I hear it's been improving in understanding the differences over the last 3 or 4 years. So I think we definitely admire the inclusion of QI in the program. They obviously don't take the punitive policing perspectives, and they're supportive of research teams and investigators in their compliance role to get all of UW research to meet the basic minimum standards, which are often considered the compliance standard. I think the conflation of the two of quality versus compliance in the research program is more so on the campus side rather than the UW Health side. Healthcare has a very long history of keeping quality and compliance in very separate buckets. They clearly are kept apart from one another. Quality activities, as an example, such as peer review, have confidentiality attached, while a regulatory compliance inspection are often public records. A third comment I would make in introducing this is the timeliness of our discussion today fundamentally supports the progression of the Clinical Research Office services and its future goal of third-party accreditation to the clinical trials program by the Site Accreditation Standards Institute, commonly called SASI. And it reflects the maturing of the research program here at UW. So let's get started. First, we will reflect on what quality and compliance, what they each are. We'll talk about some of the common historical definitions about quality and how they're closely related and sometimes overlap, but why it's important to look at their differences. For example, quality creates better outcomes, and I support that by a study which was done by international auditors, KPMG, in 2017, that noted that nearly half of all companies interviewed in a global study functioned only at the basic baseline or compliance approach to quality processes they had in place. From this baseline, and without an understanding of what is more holistic approach and the difference of quality management, quality improvement could achieve, there is often little incentive to do much else than tick the boxes and carry on business as usual at the basic level. On the other hand, in a more recent study, it was shown by a auditing company that in every case where a company accepted the quality challenge, the creative benefits and efficiencies looked much better. Yes, the processes became subject to continue. Yet the processes become subject to continued review and optimization where a culture of quality is embedded into an organization and where every function took responsibility for reducing risk and driving innovation, the company made fewer mistakes, reported less waste, and greater productivity overall. Those results were felt almost immediately in the business. Next, I will offer some thoughts on our current university research vision of quality and compliance and challenges, where we are and where we want to go to improve our clinical research program. We need to keep in mind that compliance can contain quality characteristics in its program, as I just discussed with our own clinical research compliance program. Quality goals should always assure the standards of compliance. Then I'll talk a little bit about a quality culture and mindset. What are some of the characteristics representing quality culture and mindset? And finally, I'll offer a practical example of the application of quality in clinical trials, potentially at UM and UWH via a quality management system. So what is quality? I'm going to stop here 1 second. I'm looking at Kevin, and I would like to see the slides. So I'm on slide 3. What is quality, Rochelle? So what is quality? Well, historically, Henry Ford in the beginning of the 20th century understood that quality means doing right when no one is looking. So that's a quality attitude and a quality culture. And Demings, that we know from the PDCA cycle of quality improvement, says quality is everybody's responsibility, like compliance. Compliance is everyone's responsibility. But quality is never an accident. It is always the result of high intentions, sincere effort, intelligent direction, and skillful execution. It represents the wise choice of many alternatives. And quality is a zero defects attitude. Now, Phil Crosby, who has been in the quality world for many years, coined the term zero defects in his book, The Absolutes of Quality Management, that was published in 1985. And zero defects attitude is the adapted perspective from SASE QMS standards. Zero defects is often greatly misunderstood as a term because it's sometimes believed that improvement is related to goodness, to working harder, working longer. And although working hard can be a virtue, it doesn't assure quality improvement. A person with a zero defects attitude when conducting clinical trials, has committed to making each customer experience as close to what was promised as possible. And a little later, we'll talk about the variety of customers, i.e. stakeholders, as we know, of which are many in clinical trials. Zero defects attitude also expresses a desire to improve processes because we never come to perfection, even with a zero defects attitude. Therefore, we always are looking forward to improve a process or an activity. When practical, ideally, we would love to eliminate the mistakes. Again, that's rarely practical, but it can happen. The key to improvement is knowledge, knowledge, knowledge. Knowledge is power, and with enough knowledge and information, you can apply zero defects principles and make good quality decisions for your program. Next slide. What is compliance? In general, compliance means conforming to a rule, a specification, policy, or a standard, or a law. Compliance is the process by which companies adhere to regulations. They prove they are doing so to the relevant inspecting and regulatory body, to the regulatory stakeholder. Compliance, however, is frequently associated with a rigid threshold, a distinct threshold. Compliance can be thought of, if you think, as a light bulb. You turn it on or you turn it off. The switch is the threshold. So what is, next slide, what is quality in clinical research? So it's an absence of errors according to the CTTI initiative that was put together in 2007, I think, with Duke University and the FDA. And they identified it as an absence of errors that matter to decision-making. That is, errors which have a meaningful impact on the safety of trial participants or the credibility of the results and thereby the care of future patients. Deliberate quality management of QC and QA to prevent errors and conform to customer requirements. City promotes these recommendations and the absence of errors by suggesting or recommending that quality be built into the scientific and operational design and conduct of clinical trials, aka we've all heard of the quality by design. They strongly recommend a team culture that values and rewards critical thinking, open dialogue about quality. They talk about what is critical to quality for conducting a trial, and when needed, the development of innovative methods for ensuring quality and improvement. The focus of efforts on activities that are essential to the credibility of study outcomes and patient safety. And it involves a very broad range, as we know, of stakeholders. Quality management, as I mentioned above, is quality control and quality assurance. Quality control takes bad things out of a process. It limits errors. Quality assurance puts things into a process. It assures reliability. This sounds like the Lean Six Sigma philosophy as well. Limiting the errors, pushing out the waste, assuring reliability and expedience. Next slide, the challenge. Our challenge is collaboratively, boy, that's a mouthful, redefining and understanding the differences between quality and compliance. Both are necessary, but it's critical to understand the differences. Quality is the condition and functionality of our research services, the conduct and it determines how well our customers and stakeholders accept and desire our services. Customer reactions and satisfaction are based on expectations. So proactively, we need to be careful and accurate on what we promise the customer, what we advertise in our clinical research program. And that includes when we are consenting an individual who is thinking about participating. We obviously don't want to overpromise what the study or the research activities and procedures will do for a particular participant. So the output of clinical trial process is information. It's the trial report. We collect the data, we pull the data in a database, we analyze the data, and then the output are clinical trial reports, which then we hope, as I mentioned before, go on to impact clinical care and improve patient outcomes. Basically, quality is the reliability and the credibility of information, i.e. data, providing an answer to a scientific question. Next slide. Here I've provided you, by way of Betsy Nugent, thank you, some characteristics of quality versus compliance. And what I hope these show you is that it's a different perspective as reflected by the terms used. When you think compliance, it is common to think, well, we have to do this because of the rules and regulations. From a quality perspective, it's we want to do it. We want to improve it. We want better outcomes. From a compliance perspective, it comes to the have to because it's from an agency with authority that tells us we'll get fines or we'll have problems if we don't adhere. In quality, it's an organization that wants to move forward, wants to improve, wants to excel, wants to be known as, in research, the best clinical trials campus and organization to participate and partner with in the Midwest, maybe all of the United States. Compliance has its rules that they adhere, that we must adhere to. We call them standards sometimes. Quality, we typically think of as having goals. So what do we want to attain? What can we, what is our vision rather than what the regulations say? In compliance, we focus on identifying any problems because we're approaching it as, have we met the compliance threshold? Versus quality, we're approaching it from a creating solutions perspective. So if we haven't met the threshold, how can we get beyond the threshold? How can we improve? That continuous quality improvement focus. Compliance, we often look at what is currently ongoing. And with quality, we want something that's sustainable in the longer term, so systematic. Again, compliance is regulation-based, and quality is really performance-based. It's competitive. And again, compliance sometimes is thought of having a distinct, more rigid threshold, while compliance with the PDCA cycle that we know from Deming's, we continually, excuse me, plan, we do it, we check it, evaluate it, and then we improve it, and we move on, and we find those flaws or deficiencies, and we PDCA again and again and again. It's a continuous improvement. Next slide. So what is quality versus compliance in clinical research? I've just put a couple statements on the slide here, and I want you to think about assessing whether you would say this represents compliance or does it represent quality? So regulatory requirements represent the minimum level of conduct standards and are often considered the baseline standard of the quality continuum. Is that a compliance perspective, or is that a quality culture perspective? I'd say that probably represents compliance. So how and when things are done should be driven by what is the best way, the maximized way, the improved way to ensure data integrity, and again, subject safety requirements are met at any point in any step in the clinical trial. So that's a continuous improvement. I think that represents quality. So the activity in the third bullet, activity is used to reduce costs and improve patient outcomes. So it's a win-win scenario for healthcare organizations, research organizations, and the patients or participants. For me, that one I think represents both, because certainly compliance wants to reassure the public that the clinical trial devices, drugs, biologics are safe for them. So I think it's both compliance and quality. And finally, the last one, fulfilling customer expectations and meeting requirements both, regardless of whether the customer is internal or external. That would define a suitable and high-level activity. I'd say that's quality. You may have different reactions, and I hope that we will be able to discuss if you disagree with me and when we take questions and discussion. So next slide. What is a quality culture? So if we think of quality as the process, procedures, and environment that permeates an organization, established quality principles allows for well-supported processes. And it's a culture embracing procedural aspects. It enables it to consistently develop and produce high quality research products and services that will at least meet and more often exceed regulatory requirements. This also fosters an understanding of effectively driving activities forward, quality improvement, rather than policing or limiting them or staying at a basic level. And it would define a suitable and high level of quality, and therefore it promotes a recognized and more competitive reputation. The system of quality is prevention. As I mentioned before, QC and QA. You want to get to it, you want to review it, you want to assure the reliability before it meets our customers. That can't always happen, but we can minimize the frequency of that occurring. And it's a keep the promise attitude. Quality culture transforms the developmental path from a gravel road to a smoothly paved road, allowing for fast-paced action while providing helpful orientation boundaries. When we think about a quality culture, I would ask the question of how many mistakes are too many? Well, that's not really answerable. But we could think about it as one, because the next mistake could be the one that costs you high dollars or debilitates the program and or ruins your reputation. So just one may be too many. Next slide. So what's a quality mindset? There are a couple questions you can ask yourself to determine your focus. Is it a compliance focus or is it a quality focus? So on that, I say that the FDA doesn't evaluate, for instance, ease of use, but for the consumer, it's a key factor. So even if you create a compliance service from the standards of the FDA, if it's not high quality or it's difficult to participate, you know, you and I and our customers will not value it. And as a result, we may drop out of a study, or there won't be repeat requests for research services, and our customers, whoever they are, the regulators, the internal customers, external customers, won't be satisfied. That's why when you're in the early planning, it's critical to assess ease of use alongside of any compliance processes. So second, who are the best suppliers? Who are your best partners? In a quality mindset, when you're choosing partners for your research study, you must adequately assess vendors and contractors and create contracts. This establishes the partnership, and contracts have to be clearly outlined with any expectations and regulations that each partner will follow. Otherwise, you may expose yourself to low quality services and even create challenges to conduct the study compliantly. 3, how can we convert unhappy customers into champions? FDA compliance requires that you process complaints in a uniform and timely manner. Again, compliance. But quality mindset is it does not require you to win back dissatisfied customers. However, if you treat customer satisfaction with the same respect that we have for regulatory guidelines and laws, you can clearly effectively convert the complainer or the unsatisfied customer into a champion. 4, how can we help everyone in the company stay motivated? Well, compliance via FDA requires that companies train their employees in internal QA procedures and CFR requirements. However, from a quality perspective, to create a culture of quality rather than compliance, you need to go beyond the mandatory training. You need to ensure that employees feel supported, customer feedback, motivated and understood. And if you want to achieve peak operational efficiency, investing in the team is the very first step. And 5, how can we build the program for the long haul? Often we focus so much on ensuring compliance for current projects. We don't think about quality in the long term. When we operate this way, we're not driving and thriving improvement because we don't have a system in place to help create and support the team. And because of that, you're more prone to mistakes and you can't learn from your errors as easily. Next slide. So this is an example of a QMS. The figure on the left shows you the elements of a quality management system. And I think the figure on the right, in its familiarity with the figure on the left of the circle, represents the interactive, non-siloed, cross-communication, integrated approach of an ideal, efficient quality management system. A QMS is a longer-term goal for the clinical research program, to have it with all these fully functioning elements, and as I said, efficient cross-functional communications. And you will note that we have several of these elements already in place, but we need to position them in a coalescing and collaborative manner. We have some SOPs and procedures, but we need to standardize them. We need to develop a consistent, common document management process. We have many audits, inspections, internal monitoring, which then lead us to the deficiencies and how do we improve them? Are they corrective actions? Pardon me. Or are they more formal? Do they require CAPAs? And vendor management, I talked about in the last slide, the importance of understanding and having quality partnerships and oversight of your vendors and partners. And there's training and there's risk management. Quality management system is an integrated system through which organizations can systematically plan and achieve quality objectives linked to their broader strategic goals. It's a set of the interacting elements that you see established to direct and control a program in regards to quality. A QMS is a tool to establish and continuously and consistently achieve quality objectives based on customer requirements. And again, if there are issues, process issues or opportunities, then it is fed back into the quality management system via the CAPA or corrective action plan element to ensure continuous improvement. That's a longer term goal of the clinical research office. So next slide. So here we have a shorter term doable KISS process. KISS is in keep it simple. And it's very practical. It's a 4-step system approach that the FDA supports wholeheartedly. And basically it's say what you do what you say, prove it, and improve it. So saying what you do, you have to have qualified and responsible management teams to provide oversight of the whole clinical trial process and processes. This means there should be a robust oversight and coordination among project team members to ensure good decisions. So the teams with their the site teams and study teams, pardon me, with their investigator determining best outcomes. SOPs should define procedures and responsibilities for key clinical trial processes and team members, from the protocol development at the beginning to the final clinical preparation of the clinical study report when the study closes. The SOPs should also focus on the potential anticipated risk as much as can be foreseen. So what does do what you say mean? Well, this step largely describes education and training of all staff uniformly about the trial protocol, the study requirements, the policies, the procedures, and all teams should be aware of their individual research responsibilities. And I propose and support one of the most essentials of this training is undertaking a course to support the decision-making for individual team members, an intensive training on critical thinking. Could be a week, could be a seminar, but better understanding of critical thinking. It goes back to the previous statement about knowledge, and knowledge is power. And knowledge and power, you make good decisions. So what does prove it mean? This step requires newer approaches, such as risk-based monitoring and trend analysis, which we do in some cases, not in all departments and not at all research studies or all sites. But risk-based monitoring focuses on process management and verification of critical activities, including quality control, improvement activities, to ensure that they are carried out as expected. And finally, improve it. Well, what does that entail? Well, that basically entails corrective actions or CAPAs after you've conducted an RCA. In addition, I have the figure of the Deming cycle, plan, do, check, act cycle method that's commonly used in the improve it method perspective. Next slide. So my conclusions and reflections on what I've talked with you about today is quality in clinical trials. The work we have ahead of us is we must define it and be a part of a quality culture and mindset here at UW. Quality in our research program must be clearly identified, understood, and applied apart from compliance. They are both very important to our work in protecting our participants and the quality of our data. But they come from differing perspectives and often have different outcomes and purposes. The goal is to have an effective, long-term, sustainable quality management system that supports quality, encourages clinical research engagement at every phase, and partners with the robust current clinical research compliance program. To do that, we need to embrace a zero defects attitude, which provides for the continuous quality improvement. And finally, as you can see with the work ahead of us and understanding the difference between quality and compliance, it takes a village. And we're going to need to have many more conversations about quality versus compliance until we all have a definition that we agree upon. Thank you. Next slide. These are my references. So you can go on to the next slide, which are questions. Do we have any questions from the chat? Or do we have any spontaneous questions now?
We haven't seen any questions come through the chat, but if, oh, here we go. Cindy, can you have a QI project without it being a formal research project?
Yes. And for those details, the IRB, the HRPP and IRB program has put forth on its KB and soon its website, if it's not already there, the questions to ask yourself of what is the intention of the project when you start out. Is it QI or is it intended to be research? Good question.
Bridget is asking if the recording and our slides will be available after this presentation, and yes, they will be. I can field that one. We'll be sending a follow-up email after the event, so those will be available. Sarah is asking, first of all, she says, thanks, Cindy. What are two most common challenges you see when colleagues are trying to distinguish between quality and compliance, and how have you lent to overcoming those?
And how have I what?
How have you lent to overcoming those challenges?
I think, and I certainly hear that the university campus represents a common experience across many businesses and industries in the conflagration of the two. And we don't stop to think about what is quality and how do we define it. We really don't have a definition. Compliance, we right away know that it's related to the regulations. That's where our mind goes. So I think the challenge is helping people separate that and consciously understand that that both quality and compliance works together, but they have very separate intents and separate characteristics. They're both important. How have I tried to overcome that? That's with 1 to 5 words. Communication, 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 and communication. I think it's dialoguing, it's understanding. It comes naturally as a compliance program and a program of any type, a research program, a clinical trials program. As it matures, we always go immediately to the floor or the minimum standards, which is the compliance, the fundamental floor, which is, as I mentioned before, it's at the beginning of the compliance continuum. And if you think of Deming's PDCA cycle and how it ascends the incline, we could say when that ball, that PDCA cycle is at the left-hand lower corner of our slide, that represents the PDCA of compliance. And as it moves along to the right and to the upper right hand corner of our screen or slide, it represents the quality improvement and zero defects quality culture perspective.
I think we can take away the importance of communication in that answer, Cindy, for sure.
Yes. Yes. And absolutely.
Sorry, go ahead. Sarah has a follow-up. Are there particular roles in our research infrastructure that exist and that we overlook as being integral to assisting with this challenge?
Repeat that one more time for me. I want to make sure I'm listening to what she's
Sure.
asking.
Are there particular roles in our research infrastructure that exist and that we overlook as being integral to assisting with this challenge?
Yes and no. Yes, I think that every key position in clinical research should have an attribute or a responsibility formally put in its job in the job description that quality improvement is part of their responsibility. So I think that we overlook that in really driving the perspective for everyone's the job description. And I think the people who really understand it more are often on the UWH side, obviously the medical community, because they have a long, long history of this very clear separation, as I mentioned previously, of quality versus compliance. I think probably not in our academic setting or on the university campus side do we have that clear and long history, because we have historically synonymously thought of quality as compliance, or compliance is quality. We haven't separated those. They just kind of meld together and partner in our brains. Sarah, did I answer your question?
Yeah, thanks so much, Cindy. This is not an easy environment. We have a very complex set of institutional partners. So while that distinction is important to keep in mind, so many of our successful research leaders also have academic appointments, and I'm not sure we tap them enough for sort of lending leadership to this conversation. So I think my colleague Bridget has a great question in the chat that sort of leans toward that too. So we're all interested in kind of appreciating what we can do to gain some momentum and utilize those people in good places already.
Very good point, Sarah. You're right. We're not capitalizing, so to speak, or utilizing the resources of those individuals with the dual appointments that have that information available to them to champion quality and help people understand quality versus compliance.
Yeah, Cindy, as Sarah mentioned, Bridget has a question. What recommendations or advice do you have for increasing engagement with PIs and department leadership on the quality culture and compliance conversation?
I think it's important to bring the topic up, ask. So it's very interesting to me in that I'll use an example of what I've observed over my 30 plus years in clinical research and medical care activities. When it comes to clinical research and you have a family physician or a care provider who is also an investigator in providing both clinical care and clinical research procedures and activities to a participant who is their patient, it is very interesting that when they wear the dual hats, they forget to switch them and they begin to ooze over into, in the clinical protocol or clinical trial, that standard of care and decision-making and individuality of clinical care for that individual oozes into that desire to conduct the clinical trial. I see it happen time and again. So we need to really, all of us need to step back and say, pardon me, step back and say, what hat am I wearing as I'm interacting today with this participant or patient? Am I interacting as the care provider with my patient? Or am I interacting with the participant of a clinical trial in whom I'm the principal investigator? And I think the team can better understand that and become more cohesive with your individual site and study teams by keeping that in the front of your mind and keep asking, okay, you are the principal investigator, you're the primary care provider or the specialist, whatever, the clinical provider. And part of that is involved with compliance, which you understand as the clinical care provider. So how is the compliance in that? And how do we apply quality in clinical research? So it's constantly keeping that idea in the forefront. It's asking, how does quality versus compliance apply here at this step in this study? Have we considered that? And I think initially we probably need to have little, reminders and check sheets or whatever our best reminder is to say, okay, what are you doing? You're doing it for patient protection and you're doing it for high reliability of data. But what you're doing, is it compliance or are you doing quality? So it's that continued awareness and keeping it in the forefront to ask and garner the opinions and the expertise of these individuals who have dual responsibilities on both the UW Health side and the UW campus side, and help them. It's like, come on, this at UW Health, you've been in medicine, quality versus compliance. It's like, okay, help us apply it over here in clinical intervention in clinical trials. I was long-winded, but it's everybody helping remember that we have to think about it and make our clear distinctions.
And just underlining how important it is through the entire process as well. So
Yes.
We have another question. Would you please speak to the potential repercussions of poor quality research and non-compliance?
The repercussions. Well, I think we look at, often there are common areas that we look at. We think about immediately our primary customer in clinical trials research, the /patient participant. Has there been harm because of a non-compliant or poor quality service, activity, mistake that we've done? So the repercussion to an individual, or if we've done it in a systematic way of incorrectly interpreting a protocol, have we buried all of the quality of the data for that clinical trial and the work for that study that has been done, at least at an individual site? Is that going to swamp it? So that's from a repercussion to a clinical trial participant or patient. There's repercussions to the investigator and potentially team. When the FDA writes a letter, comes in, and they're coming in from a compliance perspective, and they inspect for the minimum quality, they want to see the over more than minimum compliance, and they applaud people and universities and organizations that do more than excuse me, minimum quality. But there are potentially the dreaded 483s. So the which then can impact, is public knowledge, and which then potentially impacts the investigator and his reputation. It potentially impacts the reputation of the organization and its research program. And if it was such poor quality that it moved into research misconduct, there may be criminal penalties and repercussions with that. In addition to, one has to consider financial repercussions. Quality is actually free, if you think about it, because it's really the count. Quality is really about the metrics and counting of non-compliance. So if you can reduce and prevent the non-compliance and the deficiencies, you have high quality at no cost. So there's always financial repercussions to redo a service, recollect data, and then reanalyze a study report. So those are a couple of the areas of the risk that are impacted.